Subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to press the bell icon to get all the latest updates. Sonia Gandhi completes exactly 1 year as the interim president of the Congress party. And amid cries for Rahul Gandhi to return to the post, there is still no clarity over who will lead the party and will this post now be an elected post and will the election be a mere formality? There are prominent leaders like Shashi Tharoor, among others, who have called earlier for elections within the Congress party and are now talking about the need to contest the perception that the party is rudderless. This as the Congress enters a final stage gamble to solve the crisis in Rajasthan with Sachin Pilot and the Congress leadership having 2 rounds of meetings. Shashi Tharoor, Member of Parliament from Kerala, joins us now. Shashi, I remember speaking about this with you earlier, and you were among the first to talk about how the Congress Working Committee, one of the highest decision-making bodies of the party, is unelected, how there should be elections to it. But 1 year has passed since you and I had that conversation, and nothing at all has changed in the Congress party. Is this not deeply frustrating for you and undoubtedly for many others like you?
Look, I think many of us in the party, and I must say that I have had conversations with a lot of senior colleagues, many of whom have spent decades as adults in the Congress party's ranks, and who feel that whether or not the criticism is fair, the fact that it exists and is so widespread is something we have to recognize and confront head on. Nobody amongst us is a rebel or anxious to leave the party. None of us is tempted by the blandishments of the other side, anything like that. This is about within the party, how do we strengthen it, revive it, give energy to it so it can go out and face the enormous challenges of a resurgent BJP. And in that spirit, one of the tools, but only one of them, would be elections. Within the Congress Working Committee, there are actually 3 categories of members. There are the elected members, the appointed or permanent members, and the permanent invitees. Mm-hmm. And so what has happened is that over the last few years, all the categories have been conflated together and everyone is essentially appointed. And so in respect to the Working Committee, what many of my friends and I would suggest is that at least the elected seats be elected. Now, we recognize the limitations of that, but that's why the president will have the right to appoint the appointed members. So if there are not enough women elected or not enough Southerners elected or whatever, then you would have the ability for the president to compensate so the party is properly represented in the Working Committee. But right now, the lack of renewal has been troubling some of us. And the other thing is, of course, we have enormous respect and I would even say fondness for Sonia Gandhi, who has earned it over her long decades of service to the party. But it's terribly unfair to keep on expecting her to carry the can alone. She hasn't been in any way idle. I think it's wrong that people are implying that she has not been giving of her best. She's actually, even during the lockdown, had a number of video meetings with colleagues. She's had conferences with the Lok Sabha MPs, the Rajya Sabha MPs. She's very much hands-on. But the perception that she is interim has undoubtedly limited the extent and reach of her impact. So for all of these reasons, there is a desire to see a revival of the party, which would involve some changes in the way we are now and some reform. And that, I think, is the spirit in which I have spoken and where I think others in the party also are conveying the same message.
And yet you have called for Rahul Gandhi to pick up the mantle and said only if he's not interested should there be an election to the post. Why is it a given that it should be Rahul Gandhi, especially since Mr. Gandhi famously said a year ago that no member of his family should now hold this post? We saw that being disregarded and his mother taking over as interim president. And if he is not leading the party, then in what position does he or his sister, for example, mediate the negotiations with Sachin Pilot? It's all rather confusing, isn't it?
Well, Barkha, frankly, I think you're asking a question to which you already know the answer, because the Gandhi family's leadership of the Congress party is not contested within the rank and file of the party at all. The party workers have strong loyalty to the Gandhi family, and I might add the outside world knows it as well. So it's a slightly disingenuous question. But my answer or my statement was actually a factual one, which is that if Rahul Gandhi is ready to resume the leadership, all he has to do really is to withdraw his resignation, because he was the elected president. And so it's just a question of the working committee rejecting his resignation and the president reluctantly or whatever accepting that rejection. But if he does not, then what happens? That's really the question. So it's not that I'm advocating for any one individual. I'm saying we have a factual position. And if it turns out that Rahul Gandhi insists on the position that you quoted him as expressing last year, then I think the only way out has to be elections for the post of president. Because again, if we have the working committee coming up with a name or one single name and putting it to the AICC, well, a lot would depend on the acceptability of that name, undoubtedly. But many in the AICC might say that they would like a broader choice. And I think it will be healthy for the party to offer people an opportunity to present their vision for the future and so on. But all of this is an academic issue. Right now, I think the first question is, does the leadership agree with some of us that we need to take certain steps to revive and re-energize the party? Secondly, that a full-time and full-term president is a sine qua non, and therefore that someone should be appointed to that responsibility. Either the most recent incumbent should come back, or another solution has to be found. Only then can we talk meaningfully about how we get to that solution. There are these steps that need to be taken first, and that's what I've been talking about.
But since you've been talking about perception, and you've spoken about the perception that the party is rudderless, do you not acknowledge the fact that the perception is hurtful and damaging to the party, that there is only one family that can lead the Congress party, that in an age of modern politics, in an age where the Prime Minister's one of his biggest political trump cards is that he's a self-made man, this is hurting the perception around the party. That Shashi Tharoor can't contest for the post of Congress president, that Sachin Pilot can't contest, I'm getting into trouble, right? That Amrinder Singh can't contest. I could take any number of names. It could be anybody. That Jitin Prasad can't contest. What's wrong with all of you? Why can't you throw your hat in for the top job?
Well, there has to be a process before I think any of these things can happen. And I think, honestly, all of the leaders you mentioned recognize the situation of the party for what it is. And if indeed the recently incumbent president chooses to come back, I don't think that there will be a contest. It would only be if he absolutely said that he doesn't want it and there should be the field thrown open to others to express their interest. Then there could well be. Now, whether in the time-honored Indian political way, it'll turn out to be that people will talk in small groups and come up with one name that everybody else would then be expected to accept, or whether it would be a more open race, that is dependent upon a number of factors that it's impossible to predict right now. But I think you would agree with me that in most democracies, a political race of that sort actually galvanizes public interest. Here are people talking about their vision for the future of the party and of the country. Not only, of course, the electorate would only be the party workers, but the public would see this, would follow this, would get caught up in it. I've often told my colleagues about last year's experience of the Conservative Party leadership race, when 16 people entered the fray and it got whittled down, week after week. And when the whole process began and Theresa May had stepped down, the Conservatives were trailing in the polls. At the end of this leadership process, when Boris Johnson emerged, he was suddenly the new leader, the favorite. Election was called and he became prime minister. So if you look at the way in which historically public interest in a party can be sparked off by this kind of process, I would certainly suggest that in India too, there's no reason why we would be an exception.
If there is an open race for the post of president, would you contest?
Oh, it's entirely theoretical at this point. Listen, but I'm a fairly realistic person, and I have obviously a strong sense of what I can offer, and I have a strong sense of my limitations in terms of experience in the party. I'm relatively a Johnny-come-lately in our tradition of people serving in a party from their student days. Someone who came in after a full career somewhere else and has been around only for a dozen years, obviously has certain challenges. So if the role is going to be a principally organizational one, we may well be better off with someone who has worked in the organization for longer than I have. So we'll have to see. A lot would depend on what others want, who is keen and puts themselves forward, how people feel about that. To be honest, one never really, in any of these situations, asks somebody point blank, will you be a candidate? He or she would be foolish to say yes without looking at the overall context, the alternatives and the ways of proceeding. So I'm not saying anything about myself. And indeed, I would argue the important thing for people to understand is this is not about any individual, either me or anyone else. It's about a party, an institution, which I genuinely believe this country desperately needs, because we actually stand for certain values and principles that nobody else articulates. We represent an alternative vision of India. Yeah, sure.
I want to actually come to what that alternative vision is, because it seems to me that the Congress is now a pale Me Too variant of the BJP, and we'll come to that in a moment from now. But I do have to ask you, were you not upset at not being considered, for example, for the leader of the party in the Lok Sabha? Maybe you don't think you can lead the Congress party, but surely you feel that you can lead the party better than Adhir Chaudhary in the Lok Sabha.
Listen, I mean,
to not even be considered for it, did that not upset you?
Barkha, I'm a good soldier of the party. I've been a loyal member of parliament for 3 terms. And I believe when I speak in parliament, I speak not just for myself, but for my constituents, the people who voted and put me in office, and for my party, which has, of course, nominated me to be there. So my party gets to decide what's the best way in which it feels it can be projected. And I have to respect the party's decision, which in this case is the party leadership's decision. And as you know, I've been just as active as I could have been in the Lok Sabha under any other arrangement. I mean, we are where we are. Adhir is a friend and a colleague, and we work closely and effectively together.
Okay, that's answered like a professional diplomat, which you were before you became a professional politician. But let me ask you this. The conflict within the Congress party in media cliches is presented as an old guard versus new guard contest. But the recent fault lines that were bared when Rajiv Satav basically spoke about how it was the UPA that let down the Congress while Dr. Manmohan Singh was present in the room caused several of you to come out on Twitter and say that it was not correct to actually insult Dr. Singh in this manner. It also revealed that it's not necessarily a generational battle. There's something else going on here. What actually happened at that meeting is pretty well known now, as I described. And how do you see the fault line as generational? Or do you see the conflict between those who feel the party has to change and readapt to a new politics and those who are busy blaming and who are seen to be Rahul Gandhi's boys, busy blaming the government of UPA too?
Well, look, on the UPA 2 issue, I think that issue is not buried, so I don't want to flog a dead horse. But I will say that those who spoke about this were only addressing media reports about. None of us was a member of the Rajya Sabha. We weren't in that discussion. But what we read alarmed us, because if the media was reporting that essentially in an internal discussion of the Congress, that the UPA government and Dr. Manmohan Singh's performance were trashed by one of our own, we felt an obligation to speak out in defense. I mean, I've done so at the time. I'm proud of the arguments I made in 2014 for the record of the Manmohan Singh government. I believe it did a lot of transformational work for our country, and I felt it was important that we set the record straight in the public space. What may or may not have been said inside a closed-door meeting, I don't know. We were addressing what the media claims was said, and we addressed that. But I think since then we've all moved on. So let me put that aside. On your larger question, I think these simplistic binaries, old guard, new guard, change makers, status quoists, RG's boys and RG's girls. I mean, I think this is honestly not the way in which I see the party functioning on a day-to-day basis. I think many of us can be in multiple of these camps at different times. If by being a UPA minister, you're automatically old guard, then what happens? Then Manish and I, for example, would come and Milind Deora would suddenly become old guard. If you're looking at the age of some of these people, Milind, Sachin, Jitin, RPN Singh, people in their 40s, early 40s in some cases. How can you suddenly make them old guard? I mean, these terms honestly are irrelevant. let me say we are all in this together. As far as I'm concerned, many of us in the Congress are committed to the Congress because it is not just a label, particularly not a label of convenience, because if you want convenience, you go to the people who are in power, right? It's a vehicle for a profoundly important set of values and convictions, which are what define why some of us are in politics in the first place. I mean, frankly, I didn't need to be in politics when I came into it. I came into it because I felt there were certain values and principles worth defending, worth promoting, and which in my case I had been doing for 20 years as a writer and speaker before.
But what are those values? Because as a writer and speaker, you have been on record with criticism of Indira Gandhi and several of her decisions. That's well documented in history, right? Let's look at two significant events that took place in the week gone by. The 1-year anniversary of the abrogation of 370 in Jammu and Kashmir and the Bhumi Pujan in Ayodhya. On the Ayodhya question, you had Priyanka Gandhi Vadra leading the way and then one Congress leader after the other falling over themselves to sort of welcome the developments in Ayodhya. And it reminded everybody that it was Rajiv Gandhi who had unlocked and performed allowed the Shilanyas to take place at what was then considered the Babri Masjid or the disputed structure. On Kashmir, it seems the Congress is utterly defensive because there is a whole nationalism question that the BJP has successfully tapped into. So please explain to me on these two questions, what is the Congress value that is different from the BJP?
Oh, there's tremendous differences.
On these two.
Yeah. But before I address the details, let me make a general point, and I will address the details. The general point, very simply, is that those who look at Congress as some sort of BJP light or Hindutva light are simply not taking our own assurances at face value. We've been saying throughout these years in opposition, we are a party for all, the safest refuge for the minorities, the weak and the marginalized, fundamentally committed to secularism. We're the only party that say all of this and mean it, whereas the BJP doesn't even bother to pretend that it has the interests of any of these sections at heart. Now, I understand that you're looking at specific details. But before I enter this, let me clarify. Number one, Rajiv Gandhi was not the one who opened the locks. That was the district magistrate in Faizabad.
Rajiv Gandhi enabled the opening of the locks. He enabled the openings of they were quibbling. Now you're being a Stephanian and quibbling on semantics.
No,
the fact of the matter is
and the Shilanyas took place on a non-disputed site. It took place outside on the perimeters of the mosque, not inside. But anyway, I'm just saying, since you're raising these specific details, I had to correct the record.
All right. But
now, don't forget that the Congress understands that whereas Hinduism is a religion, Hindutva is a political faith. It's a political doctrine that actually departs fundamentally from the principal tenets of Hinduism. Hinduism is inclusive of all ways of worship. Hindutva is only interested in identity. Hinduism is open to reform and progress, which is why it's flourished for 4,000 years. Hindutva is reactionary and regressive, which frankly its roots in the racial pride ethos of the 1920s. And that's why I genuinely believe it's not going to outlast its current peak. Congress leaders, including the ones you've mentioned, profess a Hinduism that accommodates a vast amount of diversity and that respects the individual and his or her relationship with the divine, whereas the Hindutva philosophy of the BJP prefers communal identity politics and is seeking to sort of semitize the faith into something it is not, a uniform monolithic religion. Whereas we talk about Gandhiji's and Swami Vivekananda's ideas of acceptance of difference, embracing with respect the people of other religions. BJP's Hindutva seeks to erase differences by assaulting, intimidating, subjugating other views. I don't think there's any comparison really between the two.
Your comments on the 5th of August did not call, for example, for the part of the Supreme Court judgment that says that those who are responsible for the demolition of the mosque must be punished. The Supreme Court judgment that allows the mandir to come up at the site also talks about the punishment for those leaders. I did not see any Congress person talking about that. What is your own view of the Bhumi Pujan that took place? What is your own view? Because you had old timers like Manishankar Iyer actually, saying, "Oh my God, this is not something I think."
No, listen. As far as the punishment issue is concerned, I believe the court has mandated a process. A trial must go ahead. They called it a criminal act of vandalism. Very clearly, there will have to be some punishment. You can't go around destroying property. Apart from the religious issue, which is obviously an act of violence against another faith's possession. But any act of violence will have to attract the punishment prescribed by law. And I don't think anyone has contested that, which is why we didn't feel necessary to belabor the point.
But I have to interject you here, because you were on record saying that in the 2019 campaign, when comments were made about Rahul Gandhi being a Janewdhari devotee, you were disappointed with that. You were disappointed with Randeep Surjewala's sort of Hindu fight spin on that. And I remember you said it in an interview to me, so it was as recent as that.
No, but that was about the Janewdhari, because I thought that it was unworthy of us to talk about a caste angle.
Yes.
If every caste wore a Janeyu, I wouldn't have minded in making the point that Rahul Gandhi is a Hindu. But I've known Rahul Gandhi and discussed Hinduism with him, and I can tell you he's made it explicitly clear that for all his willingness to avow his personal Hinduism, he does not support any form of Hindutva, neither soft nor hard. So I just think that, this is still wrong. My regret about the comment about Janewdhari Brahmin is we are not a party that exalts caste. I'm still Nehruvian enough to say that casteism is deplorable. And that at the same time to say that you believe in the tenets of Hinduism and respect the faith is normal. In fact, as a Hindu myself, I cannot and do not object to any particular religious ritual. Once the court has taken a decision saying that a temple can come up on that ground, of course there should be Bhumi Pujan. I would question why the Bhumi Pujan is being done by the sitting Prime Minister of a country whose constitution says it's secular. That's a different issue. But a Bhumi Pujan done by the appropriate religious authorities, I would have had no problem with. But here you've got to see an appropriation of religious imagery and a conflation of the religious and the political. When Mr. Modi allows his beard to grow, ever since the judgment, you notice he's not been trimming his beard. It's getting longer and longer. And he's coming there looking like sort of the Rishi Raj, the sage king in his saffron robes and prostrating.
But imaging is part of modern politics. Your presence, your persona, your signaling, your messaging has been part of politics.
And Mr. Modi's politics particularly, as you know, I mean, I got a lot of flack by pointing out that he wears every kind of headgear presented to him at any ceremonial occasion except the Muslim skull cap.
What's the problem with the beard?
So the beard is this, it was done, I think, in order to give this Rishi Raj appearance. This is the holy man who is also the king. This is the sage who is also the warrior. That's the image that's being conveyed subtly and subliminally.
And people would say that's smart politics. And Rahul Gandhi needed to think a little more about his image when he undertook those videos.
How is it, Barkha, that you don't think it's smart politics for Priyanka Gandhi or Kamal Nath to say what they say? They're also very conscious of their audience.
Because they're not saying anything distinct, right, from the BJP. My argument to you is the following. If I decided to become like the current crop of television anchors, just a softer version, for example, where would I be? I wouldn't
anyone
be me.
accuse you of being a softer version of anyone.
A politer version of those of the kind of mad hysteria, right, that we see on our prime time. If I became a politer variant of it, my audience would stop watching me because they'd be like, this is not the Barkha I know, right? So my question is, what is the reason that someone who believed that the Congress was different from the BJP has today? What are your politics? What are your politics on, let's say, Jammu and Kashmir? Let's come to Jammu and Kashmir.
On Kashmir, I think our position was absolutely clear from the very start. And you may have heard my speeches in Parliament, Manish Tiwari's speech, Ghulam Nabi, Chidambaram Sahib in the Rajya Sabha. A lot of us have spoken out and spoken very clearly. There was a sacred compact made. And if it was to be amended, which we are not objecting to, Nehruji had also said that anything can be done to amend laws in the constitution within constitutional means. And what is the constitutional means available? You have to go to the legislature of Jammu and Kashmir. You couldn't because they're suspended. It's president's rule. So you go to the governor. But the governor you've appointed yourself. So how can you claim that Kashmir has been consulted in the shape of a governor who's your own appointee?
But this is the Shashi Tharoor position. It's not the Congress position because there are many individuals in the Congress party who disagreed. Jyotiraditya Scindia has since left the Congress, but he did.
That's right. He's the only one who publicly disagreed and subsequently has left the Congress.
I'll remind you, Dipinder Hooda got up at if I'm not wrong, at the CWC meeting and said, we are out of sync with the mood of the country. I remember this. I know this. I reported the story.
Well, you must have been at the CWC. I wasn't.
Yeah, right. That's a good duck. But I'm just saying several Congress leaders were uncomfortable You can see it in their individual tweets. There is a crisis here that the Congress is seen as too left and is accused of what is loosely called minority appeasement. And the Congress is scrambling is being defensive aggressive about these two labels.
Now, since when is respecting the Constitution a leftist position? It's a constitutionalist position. Liberal constitutionalism is the strength of this country, for God's sake. And I would argue that on Kashmir, our position was, yes, Article 370 can be amended, but through constitutional means provided in the Constitution and with the consent, at least the consultation with the Kashmiri legislature as provided in the law. Then we pointed out the dangers to federalism, because obviously, if you can ride roughshod over the Constitution like this under President's rule for one state, you can do it for any state in the Indian Union. So this was a danger in terms of federalism. We pointed to the detention of political leaders. We said in a democracy, you don't detain them. You let them speak their mind. You let them speak their point of view. You let them organize. That's what democracy is all about. Instead, you lock them up. And I made particular fuss about the concern I had that the moment you shut down the democratic space, you automatically give more room to undemocratic forces. I warned about terrorism and militancy. It gives me no joy to see the figures that have followed in the last year. So in every respect, I felt this was not a decision that was well taken. And of course, we saw the extinction of tourism in Kashmir less than a year after Modi went there and appealed emotionally to the youth of Kashmir to take up tourism and not terrorism. Now, what option has he given so many of them? Why are so many young people now going down the wrong path? So I was speaking as an Indian, and I think no one who's ever known me all my adult life would call me a leftist. It's only the BJP who has this own pet terms of abuse and have applied that to me. But objectively, I've been quite far from the left on many issues. And on this one, I will insist that what the Congress stood for was constitutionalism, was principle, and at the same time, we never said that this is about a particular religious faith or a particular community. It was about the nation being true to itself, upholding its own constitution, its own promises, and frankly, its own ways of doing things that safeguard the interest of all. What is done in Kashmir can be done anywhere else, and that's a bad thing. But you ask me, what does Congress stand for? I would say we represent an alternative vision of the idea of India. Ours is an inclusive and pluralist vision that truly reflects the heart and soul of the country.
Why are you not able to convince people electorally of this? Is the crisis leadership, or is
I stand before you as somebody who's won 3 elections in a row. I've been able to convince
I'm talking about the party. Is the crisis ideological, or is it personality? Is it personality oriented? Because you've also called for a presidential form of government. If there were a presidential form of government, the party most hurt by it would be the Congress party.
That's thinking very short term, because in fact, it's not necessarily the case. Yes, it's possible that right now, the most popular individual in the country is our present Prime Minister, but nobody is going to live forever or be in active politics forever. Times will change. My argument for a presidential system, which by the way, I first made more than 25 years ago, so it's not a new argument, is based entirely on what is more efficient in terms of separation of powers amongst legislature, executive, and judiciary, and also in terms of ensuring more accountability, because what's happening with the executive is, in the last 30 years, we've had 2 kinds of executive. You've either had these hopeless coalition governments, which are only as strong as the weakest link. Anytime one party with 5 seats threatens to leave, the Prime Minister can no longer do something. That kind of coalition government, which is actually bad in terms of lack of executive authority. Or we have the opposite, your one-man rule, whether it was a strong Congress Prime Minister or a strong BJP Prime Minister is not the point. You have a situation that as long as you have a majority in the parliament, you have a rubber stamp for anything you do. You think anybody in the BJP is going to stand up and challenge? And that too with the anti-defection law. Nobody in the BJP, no BJP MP can challenge his own government on any issue, even when the government is wrong. I've seen occasions in which we make constructive suggestions on bills. We see BJP MPs nodding their head in agreement. And then when the vote is called, of course, they're obliged to go along.
But I've also seen Congress...
Just to finish, Barkha, so my point on this is, since you asked about the presidential thing, my argument is a legislature that's totally independent of the executive, that cannot be given orders by the executive how to vote and all that, but the executive will have to sell its programs to different coalitions. On some issues, you'll get different parties supporting you. On other issues, you get other parties supporting you. That's the kind of system that a presidential one offers. That's all I said. But coming back to the Congress as a party in our present system, the ideology of an inclusive and progressive Congress, liberal and centrist in its orientation, committed to social justice and individual freedoms, patriotic in its determination to protect both national security and human security. That, in my view, still has a great appeal. That's what we've been able to sell very effectively in Kerala, in Punjab, in Chhattisgarh, and elsewhere. But we can't afford to leave the national field uncontested for the BJP's distorted, bigoted, narrow-minded version of what India stands for.
Okay, now we need to have a fuller debate sometime later over this issue of the Congress's ideology for modern day politics. I have to ask you a final question. You did speak in the beginning about the need to reform, the need to revive the party, the need to address perceptions. You are known for your wordsmithery. You use words that most people need to refer to a thesaurus for. If you had to pick one word to describe the current state of drift in the Congress, what Shashiism would you use?
I'm not going to make it that easy for you, Barkha.
Come on.
Look, I would say that it's challenging. I would also say that it's something which is resolvable because India needs a credible national alternative, and I think only the Congress can provide it. And I would urge anyone in the party who may be letting their frustrations boil over, whether in Rajasthan or anywhere else, to stay and struggle with us in the Congress for a better India. Because clearly what's going on in this country needs a strong alternative vision. And that is what I think people should provide.
All right. As they say, to be continued. Shashi Tharoor, thank you so much. Pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.